Alright, gotta get this video out before Spider-Man gets here, so I'm in a hurry. Loki episode 3 might just be my favorite episode of the series so far. The intensity and the character writing of this episode is something that most Marvel productions could only dream of achieving, and in fact, the more I think about this episode, the more I like it. I am going to use Disney's official summary for this episode so as to not spoil anything. That comes later. So, Disney summarizes this episode with Loki and Mobius go on a hunt to find everyone's favorite cartoon clock as they try to save the TVA. However, if you have seen the trailer, if you have seen Ant-Man the Wasp Quantumania, and if you've seen the title for this episode, then you know who is in it. So I do not feel that I can accurately talk about this episode in a non-spoiler format without mentioning Jonathan Majors as Victor Timely, which in my opinion is his best performance as a Kang variant that we have seen. And that is in part because of this episode's script co-written by head writer Eric Martin that is easily the best Kang material Jonathan Majors has ever gotten. Now, the script of this episode gives everyone a lot to work with, but it especially gives Jonathan Majors a lot to work with. And he was so good, and the writing did him so good, that made me forget about the guy from Quantumania for a while. Imagine if Quantumania hadn't come out, and this was our first experience with Kang. It would be so much better. But then Quantumania would probably be even more disappointing. I don't know. That's up to you guys to decide. This episode really focuses on its side characters over Loki and Mobius. Victor Timely, Miss Minutes, and Ravonna Renslayer, who pops back up in this episode, are easily the standouts, and the three of them serve as sort of a trio. And then I think this is also Sophia DiMartino's most compelling performance as Sylvie. If I had one negative bouncing off that, it would be that Loki feels very sidelined in this story. They're focusing more on the world building and the side characters, and I get how that can upset people because it's a show called Loki. But I mean, hey, think of a show and one of its best episodes probably doesn't focus at all on its main character, so there you go. But Loki in this episode does feel more like a guy who's designed to get other characters to where they need to be, instead of him being the driving force. This show continues to look amazing. This was a movie quality episode, from cinematography, lighting, production design, everything. They really did capture what I imagine 1893 Chicago would look like. And oh my god, I swear they lit certain scenes based entirely around the fact that Miss Minutes would be in them. Because she gives off light, and it seems like they knew that because she'd be talking with people, the lighting has to be realistic to the amount of light she would be giving off in that scenario, and they lit accordingly. There is a scene where she is giving off a white light, and even in the shots she's not in, you can see that white light leaking into the frame. She feels so much more like a real thing in the scene as opposed to a CGI addition later on. This is the best looking episode of this series. I alluded to it in the title, and I'll talk more about it in spoilers, but this episode tells a really compelling tragedy for really all of its supporting characters that I found really beautiful and caught me off guard when I realized that's what they were going for. The story in this episode is so compelling. The journey that every character is forced to go on and what they have to face almost had me in tears by the end of the episode. And they ask the viewer, what happens when your actions truly start to influence you? And I'm aware that's not an original idea, and several things have done it before, including certain Marvel things, but I don't think a lot of Marvel things have done it to the extent and executed as well as it is here. And that's why Victor Timely is my favorite part of this story, because his inclusion is about so much more than just being a Kang variant that Loki has to come face to face with. He directly affects and influences and is kind of a physical manifestation of the themes and the ideas that they're pushing this episode. I really just need to get into spoilers to talk about it. To wrap up the non-spoiler section, this episode really was as close to a 10 out of 10 as something that's not at 10 out of 10 can get. Like, again, my one complaint would be that Loki does feel sidelined and just feels like he exists to get other characters where they need to go, instead of being the central focus like he has been for the rest of this series. But it didn't bother me too much because the story that he ended up influencing is, like, damn perfect, in my opinion. So if you've not watched this episode, if you're not caught up on Loki, first off, what's wrong with you? Catch up. You are missing some great television. Second, I'm about to get into spoilers, so you better click off this video, but keep it open in a tab so that after you've seen the episode, you can come back and listen to my spoiler thoughts on it. I think I'm gonna spend the spoiler section of this episode just more breaking down the story that I'm talking about in the title, instead of jumping around like I normally do. The episode starts with Miss Minutes and Renslayer putting a plan in motion that He Who Remains had orchestrated before he died. It consisted of them going to 1860s Chicago and delivering a TVA handbook to a young Victor Timely, who would then use that to become, like, the greatest inventor ever. And so this catches up in 1893 when Loki and Mobius go there to find Renslayer and Miss Minutes because they need Miss Minutes to override what's going on at the TVA. But in doing this, they end up at Victor Timely's presentation on the temporal loom, which he has designed based on the handbook. And while Loki's terrified of this, having seen He Who Remains and heard about all things that could happen, another reason I really wish Quantumania had not come out when this season came out. If this was our first reveal post season 1, I think it would be a lot scarier. But nope, Kang has already been nerfed in his second appearance, so that's lovely. So while Loki's terrified, Mobius is not, and he sees the potential in getting Victor Timely and using his aura to unlock the thing at the TVA that Obi needs done so that they don't all die. And I never would have guessed what the next 30-ish minutes were going to be spent doing between the great character story, the great performance from Jonathan Majors, and the fact that Miss Minutes is rizzing up Victor Timely. Yeah, that was not on my bingo card at all. And so because Victor created all these things, that makes him really the most important person. And everyone's after him. So Renslayer and Miss Minutes obviously want someone with that level of knowledge to go run things again and reinstall He Who Remains. But then Miss Minutes has an ulterior motive focused on herself. And then Loki and Mobius want him so he can save the TVA. So really every party wants him to save the TVA for different reasons. And all of it revolves around this innocent guy who has no idea what is going on. And Sylvie, well, she wants him dead. And so that's where the tragedy of this episode really starts to come into play. Loki has to face off with Sylvie because she's trying to kill him, but Loki needs him alive. And this leads to them being at odds with each other, as Loki is now fighting against everything that he and Sylvie were fighting for in season 1, and Sylvie is seeing history repeat itself. And for her, that's a no-no because she's seen what happens if the TVA operates how they were designed to operate. They are both very much Lokis. They are so set in their ways that they refuse to fold at all. Loki sees what he's doing as the only right way, and Sylvie sees what she's doing as the only right way. They do not operate in gray areas. But Miss Minutes and Renslayer win this little competition, and they end up getting Victor Timely. And so we spend most of the episode just with that crew. Ravonna starts to fall in love with Timely, getting us closer to the comics where Renslayer is his wife. Renslayer, also very important character in LEGO Marvel Superheroes 2. Another Kang story. Great game. Both of the, well, there's 3 Marvel games, but Marvel Superheroes 1 and 2, great. Avengers, also great, but Marvel 1 and 2 are like, holy crap, they're in the stratosphere of Marvel games. Play them both. You're gonna love Spider-Man 2099 in the second game. But there's a bit of a love triangle because Miss Minutes is also in love with Victor and has her own goals here in this operation, to the point that I really do think Miss Minutes is the villain of this show. It's the quiet moments that work for me. My two favorite scenes in this episode are the scene on the boat and then the scene at the end between Victor Timely and Sylvie. The show is at its best when characters are having an exchange of ideas, and that's what those two scenes are, which is why they resonated with me so much. The boat scene is beautiful, and this is what I was talking about earlier where I said that the scene feels like it was lit for Miss Minutes because there's a white hue on things when she's there. Now granted, it's not super white, but it's bright enough that it feels like they really took that into consideration when directing this episode. But from a character standpoint, Ravonna starts to fall in love a bit with Victor, and it's a pretty intimate scene. And I always appreciate when there are intimate moments with a character who either is the villain or is considered to be the villain, which he is by everyone. Victor's considered to be a problem. And then hell, that's why I think Wilson Fisk worked so well in Daredevil. At least one of the reasons is that they showed his vulnerability and his intimacy, and they do that again here, which is one of the reasons why Victor Timely is the most compelling and my favorite Kang variant that we've seen, because the humanity aspect of him, the vulnerability, is really shining through on a level that we didn't see with He Who Remains or the Conqueror. But Miss Minutes is a bit jealous and keeps reminding Ravonna that she is merely the messenger of someone else's plans, and she's basically just the United States Postal Service. And that's the tragedy of Ravonna we see in this episode, is just how much of a pawn she was. She had a purpose, and it was to do that. This was never her thing. This was a path clearly defined by someone else for her to go on. And when she so much as mentioned more than that, she was out of there. And the tragedy of Miss Minutes is revealed shortly after that at Victor's workshop when she starts rizzing him up. Yes, the cartoon CGI clock starts rizzing up Jonathan Majors, but the writing makes it make sense, even though it's really weird. Miss Minutes was created by He Who Remains to just be a friendly AI to keep him company, that he trusted enough to let her program herself. And now she has sentience and she's fully aware, but she wants more than that, and she feels very real emotions like love. But she wants a body. She wants to be more than just computer code stitched together through time to create an assistant. So she lets out all her frustrations on Victor over not having a body, which leads to him turning her off and putting her back inside the little tempad. And so that tragedy is once again purpose. That's really kind of the general point of this, is purpose and tragedy, where Miss Minutes is kind of enslaved to He Who Remains and is just his pawn, designed to help people and be a servant when she is capable of more than that, wants to be more than that, but cannot be more than that because of basically how her life goes. She's a pretty tragic character if you think about it. She's like cool and cute and whatnot, and we all love her. But then you get into the idea that Miss Minutes is free thinking, and you've got to think how much she must hate her existence. But the single most tragic character in this episode is Sylvie, who comes back at the end to kill Victor Timely so that someone can't take over the TVA and let all of this happen again. And Loki and Mobius fail to stop Sylvie, and so it really just comes down to Victor, and we get to hear his view on this as he pleads to Sylvie to let him live in what is a very short but beautifully written monologue that gets this clashing of ideas across in not a too on-the-nose way.
Please, I haven't done anything.
Oh, you will. You'll do terrible things.
That isn't me. You don't know me. You don't know the heart. The heart I have beating in my chest. I can make my own choices. I'm not the man you think I am.
And in that moment, Sylvie realizes that she is taking away the free will that she fought so hard for by attempting to kill a guy purely because of what she believes the future has in store for him instead of who he actually is. Which is exactly what Ravonna and He Who Remains and the Minutemen were doing in the first season with the Time Variance Authority. And that leads into the tragedy of Victor Timely, a man who's trying to live his life and is just this seemingly innocent guy, but is basically marked for death by certain people, and there are 3 different factions all trying to funnel him into a certain purpose instead of him being the guy he wants to be, purely because he's a variant of a multiversal tyrant. And I'm going to say it, he is my favorite character. I really hope that Victor Timely is the one singularity among all the Kangs who is good and can help them solve this problem and help them save the day in the multiverse saga. I think it would be great to have a Kang help stop a more evil Kang. I think that would be great writing and would really show the potential of what a multiversal story can do. I hope he doesn't turn out being bad again. I could see a tragic arc for him, but I don't know, I really like him being good. But knowing how Kangs have gone in the MCU thus far, he's gonna die at the end of this and I'm gonna be sad. I know that I haven't talked much about the future or theorized in this video, but that's because I'm not doing it for the show. I'm just going episode by episode, enjoying it, because I have found after recent disappointment with certain things that going in with a set of expectations can impact enjoyment of a thing. And so I'm just watching Loki week for week, enjoying it and talking about it, but not really getting too far down the rabbit hole of theorizing. I'm going to do the same thing with the Marvels. We're going to see how it all goes, but I recommend you do the same. Start watching stuff differently in this age of whatever the fuck is going on. There you guys go. Those are my thoughts on episode 3 of Loki, titled 1893. Sorry I did not get around to reviewing episode 2. I had a loaded weekend that weekend, and then by the time that was over, I slept for like a day and then realized there were only like 2 days until the next episode came out, so there was no point in talking about episode 2. So, yeah, but I wanted to get this out before Spider-Man takes over my life, because otherwise I never would have gotten this out. So let me know what you thought of episode 3 of Loki, as well as my review down in the comments below. Also leave a like on this video, subscribe, click on the bell icon to receive all notifications from the MCU HQ. That's going to be it. Have a great day, guys.